My name is Billy Parker, Superintendent of Scott County Schools, and I'd like to thank everybody for being here with us at Elkhorn Crossing School today here in Georgetown, Kentucky. I'd first and foremost like to thank my school board for being here to support us. I believe there might be some school board members from some of our other Central Kentucky school districts as well, so thank you for being here as well. Additionally, we have a large number of superintendents here standing in support of this presentation and what we're here to share today. And then I know I've got some members of my staff and some members of our other school district guests and their staff here as well. And last, thank you specifically to the media for being here to help us bring awareness to what we are wanting to share with you today. So the title of the presentation is the impact of House Bill 6 on raises for school employees. I want to be clear that this information is specific to today. We all know that the way legislation works, they make changes, and as changes go, sometimes it can impact different specific pieces of that legislation. So we just want to make sure that that's clear. Why do we have the need for today? That's another thing that we really want to drive home, is that this is 100% an opportunity to provide education to our community and our staffs. You know, I went to the Chamber Day dinner last week, as a lot of people in this room did, and one of the things that happened after that was several people came up to me and said, as a school superintendent, you know, I heard a lot of numbers up there. I heard the governor say something about 11% and a proposed raise of 11%, and then I heard there's a 4% increase to the SEEK base, and you know, I don't understand what that means. And when I explained that, which it took some time, because this is not an easy thing to explain, they were a little bit surprised. So given that, I feel like myself, I don't want to speak for my fellow superintendents, but I believe that we are stuck in a position where if we say nothing about what this does, especially for employee compensation, then we're going to be in a situation where later there's going to be confusion about if this is what it did, why didn't you say something sooner? So I think that's the situation that we feel. We feel like this, we just want to make sure everybody's educated on what House Bill 6 does for our staff. It's Valentine's Day, so let's start with some love, right? We want to share our appreciation to our legislators for sure, because you know, this bill, it provides record investments in the teacher retirement system, the pension program, and also the medical insurance trust fund. That's important. That's important, and that's something that we can all agree that for the last several budgets, our legislators have done an amazing job with. This budget also maintains funding for full-day kindergarten. That's something that hadn't always been the case, and now we're seeing that, again, that's something, and I don't want to overlook that fact, because that is significant. And lastly, as superintendents, we've appreciated that there hasn't been mandates that came down stipulating certain things to be done with funding, because the way that it funnels through the SEEK formula, sometimes it hits us all different, and it's really difficult for everybody to be expected to do the same thing. So we appreciate the opportunity we have to be trusted to use the resources to meet the unique needs of our community. So when we look at this, we want to also talk about the increases that are being provided in this budget. There's $484 million in additional revenue that's going to be provided to education. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that and share that information too. A little over $390 million, and that's an increase to the state portion of the employee health insurance. Around $39 million to increase the state portion of the teacher retirement system employer match, and $8 million for the employee liability insurance that was required or passed last session. The one thing I'd like to point out, though, is that while these increases are significant and they are appreciated, they are all come to us through on-behalf payments from the state. And as such, they are not pots of funds that we can use to impact employee compensation. Additionally, when you look at the FSPK facility equalization, that's another thing that we're super appreciative of. That provides us with funding for school construction. But again, this is another pot that is earmarked for school construction specifically, and we cannot use to impact employee compensation. So let's talk about the pots that we can use to impact employee compensation. There's essentially three. We have the guaranteed base SEEK, we have transportation, and we have Tier 1. SEEK is simply an acronym for Support Education Excellence in Kentucky. And it's the basic, it's the building block, it's the basic foundation that we use for school funding in Kentucky. So looking at the guaranteed SEEK base, and this is where some of the information that I think becomes confusing. When you look at it, this is where that 4% number is coming in. Currently, the number that we get per pupil is $4,200. This proposes that in year one of the budget, it would be increased to $4,368, an increase of $168. The second year of the budget, it's another increase of $87 on top of that. So you look at the top of this slide, and it sounds like a positive thing. But this is one of those things, and this is why we felt the need to come to you to explain it in this format today. You can't put the SEEK formula in a soundbite. Longtime Mayor Tom Prather here in Georgetown, we talked one time, and he had a complicated issue as well, and he said, look, if you can't put it in a soundbite, you've already lost in today's world. And so I appreciate everybody being here because this is very difficult to explain, especially when you see that for us, the reality of this is that with the guaranteed SEEK base, there's a local component. And that local component deals with the property assessment values in your community. And so Scott County, not unlike anyone else in the state, we're seeing record assessment increases. As a result, for us in year one, it's actually a decrease of around $45 for our guaranteed base SEEK. And in year two, a decrease of $112. So this is a pot that we're actually seeing in Scott County that is not able to be helpful when it comes to providing additional compensation for our staff. So I also wanted to share this because I've shared some of this information with members of my community, and they're just, you can see their eyebrows raise and their eyes get big because it's very interesting that, this is what it sounds like. This current year that we're in, $4,200 is what's being provided per pupil. And it sounds like that's what we're getting from the state. But notice, in reality, that blue is Scott County. That portion that's provided towards that base SEEK funding is coming on the backs of my local community. And you see that it's over half. We're around 60% of what is being provided towards that local base. And if you'll notice, I'm going to progress through the next couple years of this proposed budget. Year one of the proposed budget, you notice that the blue, the Scott County local portion, increases. And then year two, it increases again. It's not just a Scott County problem, though. We know that the way the SEEK formula works, growth districts don't see the benefit that districts that maybe don't have that growth see. However, if you look at this next slide here, you see that the state portion has in fact gotten smaller, but yet the local portion has grown significantly. I'm going back to kind of a previous slide there, and this shows the current year that we are in right now, this school year. And you'll see that we are at a 60-40 clip where Scott County, my taxpayers are providing 60% of that. This is what it was in 2001, 2002. That is the shift that we are seeing. And that's part of the difficulty that school boards and superintendents are finding when trying to provide this additional compensation. Looking at it just in a different way, you can see across the state, the local portion has out increased and gone beyond the state portion. Now that's just one pot. So let me talk about the next pot, transportation. Transportation. So there is a funding formula that we've all known about forever, and nobody's really disputed the accuracy of it. So with that funding formula, it just tells you as a district how much money that it would take you to fund your transportation department fully. Everybody's number is different. It hits everybody different, but in Scott County, that number is around $5.6 million. So currently, we are provided funding at 69% of that $5.6 million. This proposal suggests that we would be up to 80% in year one of the budget and then up to 100% in year two. For Scott County, that's how it translates. Again, for every district, it will be different, but for Scott County, that's how it translates for us. So you see an increase or money for $625,000 year one, and then $1.1 million increase in year two. That is all positive. That is all positive, and there's no local offset there for the transportation side of it. Tier 1 funding would be that third source. Tier 1 funding, this is probably, for me, the most complicated aspect of our funding formula. Essentially, what Tier 1 funding strives to do is provide equalization between counties that you would consider the haves and counties that you consider the have-nots. So for instance, we would receive $685,000 next year, but there are other districts that maybe don't have the property assessment growth that we have had that would receive even more. And it helps to, again, try to balance out between growth districts and districts that maybe are not growing or perhaps even declining. But the one thing that you'll notice on that slide is the red, that the second year for us is projected to be a decrease from year one to year two. No different than I've heard others say, we can't give you money to use for raises that are one-time money for a reoccurring cost. That's no different for us as well. It's difficult for us to be expected to use the $685,000 when that's not all going to be there for me to use in that second year. Again, I'm speaking specifically of Scott County schools. So when I speak of this, these numbers will be different between me and my fellow superintendents. But a raise currently in Scott County, a 1% raise for us would cost $600,000. Now, this next slide's super busy, and for those that will get a copy of the presentation, the last page of the presentation is actually a full-blown page that shows all of these numbers. I'm not going to go into these numbers in great detail. I simply wanted you to be aware that the state of Kentucky, the Department of Education, provides us with a budgeting tool, a calculator that we use when we're trying to prepare our budgets. The big pieces that we have to input are student numbers, property assessment values. I feel like I'm missing something. That's the biggest two pieces of it. So then from that, it spits out all of the information that we need. I will point out, for Scott County, the first year of the budget, overall, every single dime that I could put towards raises would be $1.3 million. But then if you'll notice, the year two, we don't see an increase, and in fact, we see a decrease from the prior year. So what does that mean for us? This is what House Bill 6 does for Scott County schools in terms of teacher compensation. The first year of the budget, we would be able to provide a 2% raise for our staff, and that's if we did not consider all the inflationary issues that we know people are dealing with in their private homes, we're dealing with as well. So costs for buses, costs for repairs, all of those things have hit us no differently than it's hit households. But taking that out of consideration and applying every dime we could do a 2% raise. Year two, we could do no raise. I know last year there were conversations were had, and a lot of the conversations were had around, listen, we're in a troubling spot with workforce shortages. We need some help if we could get some help. And the answer that we were provided, and I don't think this is unfair, this is what the answer was: we're not opening the budget this year. We can look at that next year. So that additionally for me kind of heightens my concern to make sure that everybody is very clearly aware of what this budget provides. Again, this is not just Scott County Schools that is facing this situation. This slide and the slide that follows shows you other counties, and counties and independent school districts, and how this budget hits them. This information was provided to me by my fellow superintendents or their finance directors. And as you can see, there is a pattern, and it hits everybody regardless of if they are what would be considered a growth district or a large district versus a small district. Oh, and there is page 2. I will add at this time, too, that some of the superintendents, their districts that are listed on these pages were not able to be here for conflicts and different things, but they really wanted to make sure that their story was a part of this event. So across the state, if you look at those 3 buckets of funds collectively, across the state, what you see is an overall decrease in those 3 pots of $42 million. You see a decrease overall in the SEEK allotment. You see a decrease overall in the Tier 1. You do see an increase in the transportation. So that is the clear picture. Some would say that that should be expected because our student attendance rates have decreased the past few years. And while that's true, when you look at the decreases in students compared to the decrease in funding, those don't line up. And that's because it's not just the student attendance numbers that hit that. Again, a lot of it is the property value assessment, the record property value assessment that we're seeing across our state. This is just that same previous slide shown for math nerds like me. So what's the point? It is true, we are being provided more funding, but it's an increase in year 1 with a decrease in year 2. It really was disheartening for me to see when the budget came out and then to compute the numbers and see what we could provide for teacher compensation and employee compensation, but then to see that there was specific references in the budget to district mergers, district closures, if we weren't able to provide for adequate hiring, increases, improvements in hiring. That statement, to me, suggests that there would be meaningful monies in here for that very purpose. And again, we are super appreciative of what this budget provides, but in terms of staff compensation, it really leaves us falling short. Significant improvements in hiring require significant investment. This is, again, Scott County specific. Before the pandemic, a new teacher for Scott County made $38,700. First-year teacher now makes $41,200. If you look at that $41,200 and plug it in the CPI, the common inflation calculator that everyone, regardless of party, accepts as an honorable computation tool, you see that the buying power of that $41,200 is just $34,000. So our community, our staff, they are losing ground. And myself and my finance director last week, we attended a Economic Outlook Summit in Lexington. And one of the things that was brought up was that it's a cautiously optimistic outlook for this coming fiscal year. One of the comments that was made was that we've seen in industry all of these wage increases in wages, and that's all leveling out. And for me, I was sitting there and I acknowledge I've seen that. I've got friends in private industry and in other work sectors, and I see what they have seen. But I know for our teachers, they're sitting there and they're thinking, where was that for us? And so I'm really concerned too that if we aren't making sure everyone's aware of how this budget hits, we may miss a critical juncture and a critical moment for us to really make that point known and make it clear for everyone. Workforce shortages, 100%, that is the most critical challenge that we're facing. We've got to have recurring funds available to us to improve salaries, to better attract and retain the best quality people. And, you know, people that are on the front lines, superintendents, we all see and understand very clearly the shortages that we're contending with. And I understand that perhaps if you're not as accustomed to that world, you might not. So just yesterday, the Legislative Research Commission issued a report, a publication that talks about teacher shortages and supports that are in place for new teachers. And so one of the very late additions, so I hope this all comes out correctly, but a late add to the presentation were a couple of slides that communicate that. On this talks about average annual teacher turnover. You can see that significant increase in the lines. We're having more turnover. This next slide, this is a slide in which school principals responded and shared, you know, when you have applicants, how often do you have no available or satisfactory applicants? How often are you seeing that you have fewer or considerably fewer applicants than 5 years past? I would simply like to point out this. Math has been an area that there's been a lot of talk and concern about. In math, in 2019, pre-pandemic, we were seeing that 55% of principals were reporting no or no satisfactory applicants at that time. That's up in last year's report to around 69%. Additionally, in 2019, 82% were reporting fewer or considerably fewer applicants than the previous 5 years. I want to point out that now that number is 91, and that's 91 from the previous 5 years, not from that same point in time. So we are seeing, and I want to just clearly illustrate that this isn't a problem that has just come upon us. This has already been a problem, especially in some particular certification areas. But it is reaching a point that I'm really concerned if we're not able to respond to this, that we may be in a difficult spot. This to me might be just a tipping point that we really need to be thoughtful of our next move as a state. And then the last slide I'll share, the two big things that jump out to me here are this. Alternative certification. That is an indication that has increased significantly. That would be a pathway that when you see that increase, you know it is crystal clear that we're seeing that we are having difficulties with hiring. And the biggest alarm bell is the increase in emergency certifications. Emergency certifications, you simply have to have a bachelor's. It does not have to be in anything teacher related. So if you're emergency certified, you have a bachelor's, you may have no qualification beyond that, and you are eligible to go into a classroom. I want to be clear. I can't speak for everybody, but I can say in Scott County, we wouldn't be able to make it without our emergency certified employees right now. We are very thankful to them, but we also see that the lack of training and the lack of qualifications on the front end for them is a serious hurdle that is impacting their ability to make a significant difference. So other states. There's a group of other states that it seems like many of in our legislature seem to point to as models for how to govern. And it seems like there's generally a desire to follow in their lead. Tennessee would be a specific example where they are reducing their state income tax. That's something Tennessee has done. That's something our legislature has expressed the interest in doing. But something else we're seeing in these other states is they are understanding that teacher compensation is one of the areas that needs to be addressed. Take a look at this slide. Some of our local states, Indiana and Tennessee specifically, you can see the state average for Kentucky $38,000 for the average starting salary. $60,000 by 24 in Indiana. $50,000 starting salary over the next 4 years in Tennessee. In Central Kentucky, I don't have as much to worry about with our neighboring states. But I know my fellow superintendents in Logan County, for instance, are pretty concerned about what's going on in Tennessee. Indiana, that's going to be a concern as well. So we're dealing with a situation where people could easily cross the state line, receive better compensation than they're receiving here, and who could blame them, honestly? So I wanted to kind of close with opportunities for legislative support. The first one, help us educate our communities about K-12 school funding. One example, the most common misconception that exists, and we hear this all the time, especially lately here in Scott County. 5 years ago, we built Great Crossing High School, which you all saw as you came in. We are on the path to next school year having a replacement Scott County High School built. So we have a lot of new and shiny here around Scott County. I've heard from my local community, how is teacher compensation an issue for you when you've got all these nice buildings that are springing up all over town? The answer is simple. School construction funds cannot be used for teacher compensation, period. It's that simple. We can't use those funds for the teacher compensation and the employee compensation needs that we have. Another one, and this one is one that I'm led to believe simply requires maybe a one-sentence change in the budget. Back years ago, they would propose budgets, and as the budget was proposed, there was an expectation of how much money would be paid out to districts through the guaranteed base SEEK and through the SEEK allotment. There were occasions where the calculations were off. There were occasions where there was extra money left over. When that extra money was left over in the past, that money was distributed through the SEEK formula to districts because it was allotted for that purpose. It's not money that is coming from a different source. It's money that was already expected to spend on that area. So that was something that was allowed to happen. The most recent budgets have suggested that if there is any kind of SEEK excess, that money goes back to the state's overall budget to be used for a different purpose or perhaps saved in the rainy day fund. I can't speak to exactly what pot that has gone into, but I can say I know it hasn't been redistributed through the SEEK formula. And that would be an easy request that we can make and an easy change that could be made. This past school year, $50 million in funding remained, and it's projected that $160 million will exist for fiscal year 24. Again, we talked about things we were appreciative of our legislators for. It's Valentine's Day. Thank you. We appreciate that love. We want them to maintain that commitment to the teacher pension system. But we also encourage them to explore other ways to provide more reoccurring funds for raises. And how could they potentially do that? Through improving the guaranteed SEEK base. This is a way that every superintendent that I've spoken to and I'm aware of supports. Because taking it through this, a 2% increase in the SEEK base in general provides a 1% increase in our ability for employee raises. Now, it does hit us all differently, but by running it through this way, who could not support running it through this way? Because for counties that maybe don't have the assessment growth and they don't have the economic opportunities that we have here in Scott County, it's going to hit them a little bit more favorably than it hits us. Who wouldn't be in favor of the have-nots, so to speak, getting a little bit more? I don't believe anyone in our state. I presented this presentation a few times over the past few days, and In the past, it stopped here. And it stopped here for a very specific intention. Again, we want to be informative. We want to provide this as an educational experience. We want people to understand this budget and what it does and how it hits in relation to staff, employee salaries. But before I even walk away, the first question I always get is, okay, so what? So what are you asking for? The Kentucky Association of School Superintendents, for, I couldn't even tell you how long, for months now, we have supported and been behind a back on track funding plan. So if I was asked, what are you asking for? This would be one that, again, has been proposed by the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents, and it's one that I would be in support of. And that would provide a $300 increase in the first year of the budget and a $300 increase in the second year of the budget. This investment would provide funding for more impactful, game-changing competitive salaries for teachers and staff serving our schools and districts. And it would also provide critical classroom resources to support student learning, address safety needs, chronic absenteeism, and mental health supports. And I'll close with this, and I say this all the time, and I believe it with all my heart, and that's why I'm standing before you today. What we do matters. What goes on in our classrooms matters. And I'm concerned that if we don't see supports for superintendents and school boards to provide additional raises for their staff, that they will be forced to look to their local communities for that support. And in some cases, there's nothing more to give in some local communities. So, again, I hope that this has been informative. I hope it has helped to explain that this is very complicated. You cannot put this in a soundbite. But again, I hope this has been informative. I did want to kind of close by saying I'll take a few questions from media, but then I do want to reserve a good chunk of time for my fellow superintendents to be able to talk to the media about how this hits in their communities. Could my fellow superintendents, could you raise your hands? So we have a strong showing of superintendents from across Central Kentucky. All right, well then I will close with that. Again, media, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you all being here to help communicate this message to our communities. And again, superintendents are available for further comment. Thank you all for coming.